I see everyone playing the Undertaker and touting that the Scholar is weak, blah blah blah, but you are so wrong! The Scholar has the best passive in the game. It's absolutely incredibly strong with the right setup, and that is the requirement. So I'll explain exactly how it works to you. Let's go. So firstly, just quickly how to unlock the Scholar. Unlocking both the Scholar and the Undertaker require you to have defeated Tricephalus, the very first boss. Once you've done that, you'll then get a message from our Iron Friend to go and visit the Small Jar Merchant. This will then get you through the chapel. Certain events will happen. After that, you'll have the option with both of these new Nightfarers.
You appear surprised.
You'll sort of continue that story with the new Balancer unlocked and then potentially the Dreadlord once you've unlocked that. So before we get into the reason why the Scholar is pretty OP, we'll just cover generally the playstyle here. It's really all about status effects and then buffing allies and debuffing enemies. And that's all relevant with the attributes as well. So the Scholar has B, HP, FP, and Stamina, which is pretty solid. D, Strength, so do keep that in mind when you're looking at weapons. Though luckily you've got Dexterity, Intelligence, and Faith at C, and then Arcane at S. That is the real kicker. Anything that has bleed, any status effects, etc. Because of the arcane being S, you will trigger that effect so quickly. So you really want to focus on status ailments and building those up on any enemy that you're facing. But you do have a few other options, and we'll cover those in a little bit. But I do want to talk about Bagcraft, which is the passive for the Scholar. Bagcraft does a couple of things. Now, initially it carries more items, which means that your item slots will carry 4 of an item rather than 2, and you can level up the items by using them. At level 2, the effect is strengthened. At level 3, a bonus effect is added. Something to note about this as well is each individual item isn't necessarily leveled up individually. So items have categories. Now, what's really great about this and kind of why it's OP is because all of the best items that you're probably going to be using anyway are all actually linked, like the exalted flesh or the boiled crabs and prawns. So basically your overall mission, should you choose to accept it, when you are on each expedition is leveling up these items to level 3 as fast as possible. So you want to be constantly using items as the Scholar. Now, the reason you want to do this is when the items hit level 3, they will gain additional effects. Now, an example being throwing weapons here. If you get them to level 3, which is pretty easy to do, they will lower the defense of the enemies when hit for a period of time. So essentially, you want to carry a stack of throwing daggers and just throw them at every boss because it will just lower their amount of damage reduction. And then for exalted flesh, it will further increase your overall attack power at level 2, and then at level 3, it will now buff your affinity power as well. And then the best one really is the boiled crab, which gives you additional damage reduction at level 2, and then at level 3 it will also increase your max health by like 20%. So essentially, by having all of these, right, like yes, you're getting all these buffs, but what really makes it strong is combining it with the items conferred to nearby allies' relic power. So now essentially in every boss encounter, you arrive at that boss encounter, you lower their overall defense by throwing a dagger at them. You can then lower their enemy's attack power by 2 ticks with your analyze skill, more on that in a little bit. And then you've got the choice to say buff yourself and your allies with 20% damage reduction and 20% extra max health. And then you've also can improve your attack power with the exalted flesh, or your stamina with the turtleneck, or any of the other effects as well. Like, this is really strong and absolutely makes the Scholar just incredible in basically every encounter, not because of their overall damage output, but because of the buffs that you can provide to your allies and the debuffs to your enemies. It really makes encounters a lot easier. The 2 skills for the Scholar is Analyze, which allows you to mark a target or yourself and provide either a buff to yourself or a debuff to enemies. Now, generally when you're fighting trash and just like on an expedition, you should be buffing yourself. It raises your overall stamina. When this is maxed as well, it will lower the damage negation from 1 hit as well, but it also just further increases your max stamina. Because trash dies so fast, you don't really need to debuff them. The debuffing here at the max level will further reduce the enemy's attack power and gain a one-time bonus damage to the target itself. So you will want to be aiming at least for mid when targeting bosses. The one-time damage bonus isn't necessarily amazing, but it's not that hard to get the max, just get that extra bit of damage off anyway. So I do often just leave the Analyze up when I'm trying to specifically aim for that. The ultimate ability here, Communion, scatter pages of taboo tome to thread enemies and damage simultaneously. This is kind of a tricky one to understand exactly what it does. So this threaded enemy, essentially it will thread all of the enemies in an AoE around you and your allies as well, and then add certain effects on top of that. So what the initial and the main reason you want to use this is because any damage afflicted to any threaded enemy will be transferred to the other enemies as well. So if you're in an encounter, like a lot of the new bosses that have been added into the game that have multiple enemies there, you want to use this ultimate. So then when you're damaging one of them, you will damage all of them. It's actually really fantastic to clear trash and gain a ton of runes from it. So if you're in an encounter or just generally exploring, there's a lot of enemies around, pop this, you'll kill them all very quickly, gain a bunch of runes from it. Now also it threads your allies, so any healing that's done to them will also heal the other allies that are threaded as well. And anytime enemies actually attack you, if they're threaded, they also take a portion of that damage themselves. Now all of the ultimate really is focused on AoE, which is kind of a problem because not all fights in the game are AoE. There is a relic buff that really helps with this, and I'll get into that right now. For your relics, there's a couple of things to think about, but firstly, as mentioned earlier, items confer effect to all nearby allies is an absolute must. This comes from the Knight of the Fathom. The flask also heals allies, is pretty valuable as well to fit this sort of support playstyle that you do have with the Scholar. We'll touch on the remembrances in a second, but the cleansing tier, which is the first remembrance relic that you do get, does come with the continuous damage inflicted on targets threaded by ultimate art. Highly recommend this, as it makes the ultimate art significantly more useful. As mentioned, its best value comes from AoE, and this means that even when fighting single target bosses, it's still actually going to get some damage out of it. The other effects on this are just pretty okay. And then I'm also running the Knight of the Wise for the poison effect. The starting armament inflicts poison, and rot in vicinity increases attack power because of the value that you get out of that. Now, the final remembrance relic that you get here is this one that adds the Scholar allies targeted by character skill gain boosted attack, which is great, prevents slowing of character skill progress. Yeah, that's fine. And then the character skill cooldown reduction. Personally, I prefer to run something that's going to buff my effects with status effects like Knight of the Wise, and I think you should be looking for that as well when you're looking at your relics. But there are other options as well, like the new ones that come from the new bosses, like the Knight of the Dregs gives you benefits for status elements and buffs to that, which is absolutely super valuable for this overall build. And the one from the balances as well improves your melee attack speed and your melee attack power, and improves your skill attack power and continuous FP recovery. So overall, both of those are really good. Ultimately, I would be leaning in the Dregs direction if you're going to run that. But that's basically what you're looking for here in terms of your relic. You're looking for status ailment buffs. You're looking for effects that increase your overall melee attack power, and then generally anything that benefits your allies, like the items confer to allies that we were mentioning earlier. So we did touch on the remembrances, but I just wanted to cover these quickly if you don't know. So you'll just need to go into expeditions to get up to Remembrance 3. Now, once you've done this and you enter the Remembrance here, you'll just need to follow the quest chain as you always have with these. I don't want to spoil anything for you. Something I wanted to note about Remembrance 3 is that when you go and do that personal objective that you need to do from that mission, it's kind of tricky. Now, it doesn't specifically say, but you do need to do one of the new bosses, the Balancers or the Dreglord, in order for that specific point of interest to occur. When you get to that sleep point of interest, just follow this pathway that I'm going through. You kind of need to veer off to the right, and then inside this little room is where you'll find the item that you need to pick up and then take back to the round table hold. But at the end of this, you'll get the Chatless, and then you'll be able to go into Remembrance 4 immediately afterwards. Now, when you go into this one, you will need to climb all the way to the top of this location. There is like a big, what do you call this, like a stone crystal thing on top that you'll need to climb on top of, then climb on top of that, and then follow through the hole, and you'll open a door. This will then create like an invasion. You'll need to defeat those enemies, and then you'll be able to go back through that door and then finish that remembrance. And then you essentially need to go and defeat Nightlords. At this moment, I'm unsure if it's generally Nightlords or the two new ones, because I was just grinding the new Nightlords, so that's what I defeated, but maybe you should be doing that as well. Now, the last step of the Scholar's Remembrance does require you to beat the Dreglord with that personal objective active. After that, you will get that final relic tier. Let's talk about some things to look out for and just generally playing the Scholar. As mentioned earlier, the Scholar is amazing for status build-up. So when you're trying to find, say, what weapons to use and just generally how to build yourself on runs, looking for status effects is my main focus on any weapon I'm looking at. If it doesn't have a status effect, typically I'll ignore it unless like I don't have a better option. So you want to hunt those status effects. Dual wielding is really strong because of that, especially if you can, say, have a rapier in one hand that has a certain status effect, different one in the other hand. You can like, sort of trigger both both. Same with the self-buffing of your stamina. Dual wielding just is so much stronger because you'll always have so much stamina. In the guidebook, by the way, you can actually see the explanation of how Analyze works. It also mentions that you can change the camera speed for the Analyze mode. This is a lie unless you're playing on mouse. It only changes the camera speed of Analyze if you are using a mouse. It does not for controller, which is really annoying. I wish that I could increase that speed because it's sometimes really hard to track these fast moving enemies. And lastly, I'll say, even though Arcane is S, which, you know, in turn means that you could use a lot of dragon incantations here, they are really strong with the Scholar. You've got C and Dexterity, Intelligence, and Faith. So as long as you're using a weapon that fits that category, even using incantations, spells, etc., like say, you know, having some sort of spell blade set up, it does work okay for the Scholar. It's not like absolutely incredible, but it definitely works. And I have had runs where that's just kind of the direction it's taken me, and it will see a lot of success, especially because of Scholar's abilities. You know, you are trying to buff your allies with these effects we mentioned in Bagcraft, as well as Analyze, which is better to use from a bit of a distance because it does slow you down. Being a sort of a mid-range fighter using a sort of spellblade build is quite strong here as well. So there's a lot of flexibility with the Scholar's kit in terms of its weapon variety, leaning into different status effects, leaning into different weapons, and just honestly don't be afraid to have like 3 different weapons you're using that have 3 different status effects, and then two-handing them and switching between them and just triggering status effects constantly. It's really fun to use and just try and focus on these, and I've had a blast playing the Scholar, and I think you will as well. Now I'm going to leave you with a full unedited expedition of the new Dreglord with the new map as well, also showcasing how the crystal mechanic works and like what you can actually do when you do break that curse. So you get a good gauge of how the new map works as well as the new Dreglord, and then just generally all the advice that I've talked about in this video as the Scholar is sort of put to effect, and you can see my decision making around weapons and buffs, etc. And I really like this run because it really didn't go like perfectly. Like there's a lot of really tough decisions I have to make in terms of gear, some very bad decisions that I do make that I'm sure you'll be able to pick those out and let me know in the comments if you do find them. And then the end fight is like just as close as it could possibly get. So I really like this run, even though it's like not perfect. And I do think that as YouTubers and just generally in terms of content, we always show like the coolest stuff and like, you know, the most perfect run and no hit runs and everything. And that's just generally not how most runs go. And that's why I like this run, because it's not perfect. There's a lot of mistakes, but then you can see a lot of the advice that we talk about in this video and just like the general usage and gear decisions and, you know, the actual putting it all into effect, I suppose. And that's why I want to leave you with this. So here we go. Let me know any tips and tricks you have for the Scholar in the comments down below. Thank you guys for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is Norza, and I hope you have a great day.